But yeah, so here we go. We are now recording. And yeah, I don't want to mess this up again. But tonight we have a sommelier, a Lego enthusiast, a Star Wars fan, the NorCal brand ambassador for Broken Shed Vodka. Jay Vanni, thanks for tuning in with us tonight and figuring out your internet for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules and having your wife put the kids to bed like I am to spend some time. I'm sure it's a godsend, especially for you, Drew, with the little one, getting the wife to take over and when you have these kind of events. And, without them, we wouldn't be able to hang out outside and drink and have some fun. So,
Yeah, yeah,
so no complaints there.
it's definitely a good thing to have her around, and you try to help out as much as you can. But happy hours at 7, so I can't. I guess I could have scheduled it better, but I didn't. So it is what it
Hey,
is. Yeah. So
what are you gonna do?
one thing I wanted to ask you about before we get into kind of the Broken Shed thing, but it was like you actually have a pretty extensive wine history, and
I
I
do.
was checking out the LinkedIn today, and I saw that. So you're a level 2 som, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay, and so like, can you describe that process? Because I do think there's a lot of people out there that when you hear sommelier, I mean, you kind of think about like those movies that they came out with, or you think about kind of like the wine snobs and stuff like that. But there's there is a lot of benefits to doing those things. And I mean, you didn't go like the full board. You kind of went like, okay, I got past the easy kind of level 1
Right.
thing, but I did enough work to do level 2. And I'm just kind of curious, when you're going through that, what's that like? And then what are the benefits that you still see today from doing that kind of education?
I mean, if you're interested in wine at all, I would highly recommend anybody to do at least the level 1. Uh, I personally did it because I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life working in restaurants, and wine is a passion of mine. I actually worked for Diageo for a while. I think you and I talked about that through text a couple days ago. You and I have that history in our background, and I was a pastry chef actually before, and I fell in love with wine through pastry, and I just got tired of baking, and so I wanted to do something different. And so through baking process, I actually fell in love with wine because we did a lot of dinners and did a ton of pairings. So the next best thing I thought of was I want to learn as much as I can. So luckily we live in an area that you can't basically throw a stone without hitting a winery. And
Yeah.
so I got a job through a temp agency and started working up in Napa. And they actually paid for me to do my entry som just as kind of like a crash course for um, the winemaking process. And then I started getting really into it about fermentation science and got to explain all that through tours and things like that through like my 7 or 8 years working in Napa. And then I kind of took that back to the restaurants. I started managing my own wine program as an assistant food and beverage director. And someone helps. I mean, it gives you the difference between Chardonnay, Viognier, and like a Chenin Blanc, for example, or a Marsanne and Roussanne or Burgundy. I mean, it gives you the very basic foundation. What Somm Level 2 does, though, is it takes that and kind of everything that you learn about that, it kind of just builds on. So it gets a little bit more regional focused. These are the typical varietals that you'll find in a specific region. It delves more into pairing, but I think the biggest thing, especially since it is more restaurant focused than say like the WSET, is that you get a larger service aspect of it, like the proper way to serve wine, what temperature, how to properly cork and savor wine, which was really always kind of fun. And just, I think the biggest thing that I gained from it was really kind of the pairing knowledge and being able to use that. And with that, though, it kind of is carried over now into the spirits because you can use those same techniques of pairing um, in building cocktails as well. And so I think that's kind of the biggest beneficiary that I've received from it is that not only do I now kind of use it in my own personal life and I talk spirits most of the time now, but when I'm in an account or places and somebody has a question about wine, I typically try to jump in and help. And I think that what the process is like is there's a test. It's not an easy test, but it's not like crazy difficult. This one has 10 blind, so you have to be able to identify 10 wines that are blind just by region and varietal. And then there's a essay portion and a multiple choice portion. So you have like 50 questions and 40 minutes to answer the multiple choices. Then you do like a small essay portion, and then you taste 10 blind. And in order to pass that portion, you actually have to get 6 out of the 10, so at least 60%. So it's not too crazy. And if anybody is interested in becoming a sommelier, my biggest advice would be taste. Taste anything and everything that you can get your hands on. You will eventually find out that one of the biggest differences is, like, say something local, for example, you'll be able to tell in a glass the difference for, say, something like a Napa cab versus, say, like an Alexander Valley or a Sonoma cab. And I would say that's probably one of the things that I kind of like, is when I talk about wine and share that with people, is just those subtle nuances. And you can actually, almost like bourbon in a sense, kind of taste what the direction of where they were going with it, as opposed to using like a Stav and oak program. I mean, you're using an entire barrel. And so you kind of get what they were trying to achieve within the glass. And so I think one of my favorite things that draws me to wine more than anything is it does change from vintage to vintage. And it's literally the science behind it, depending on how much water, wind, sunlight, etc. Um, you get something completely different each year. I mean, obviously the mass-produced wines, they try to make them taste as similar as possible, but even if you were to take like 3 different vintages of something that you spent $10 on at the grocery store, it would taste completely different actually almost each year. So yeah.
That's it's always trips me out when I think about sommeliers and being able to identify by region. And so, and you kind of brought it back to like whiskeys and stuff like that, which I think is cool. Now, when you're talking about doing those tastings, like, was that an exercise that you did often, where you would be like, okay, here's a here, I know there's a word for it and I'm totally blanking on it right now, but here's a vertical, right, of 10, 11, 12 of this Cabernet. Was that something that was kind of like just part of that training method when you were trying that?
It can be. I mean, that's where you would go into like Som level 3 is more being able to taste vintage to vintage. Level 2 is more about distinguishing like soil types. Like something, for example, like if you were to go to Napa and taste, like, I'm sure you guys have heard of the term Rutherford dust when it comes to Cabernet, um, especially within the Rutherford region. It is something that is a soil composition that is found within the ground there, that actually gives it kind of like leathery tobacco kind of quality to the grapes. Whereas if you were to taste something from like Alexander Valley, the soil composition actually has pyrazine in it, which actually gives those wines like a more like green, raw bell peppery kind of quality. And so I would say, if you are looking to do like the Somm, like I said, taste, get a cab from Alexander Valley, get a cab from Napa, get a North Coast cab, get a Sonoma County cab. And really, it's really super distinguishable. I mean, once you start kind of tasting over and over again, you can identify, uh, based on just little subtle things like that, where it's grown without looking at a label. And I think that's, the biggest beneficiary is I was part of a bottle share group, and we would get together once or twice a month, and we would choose a region. So like we did, Burgundy wines, and everybody had to bring a different Burgundian wine. And we sat there and opened them and put them all in like brown bags, and then tasted them, took notes, and then tried to figure out which was which. I mean, there were more wrong guesses than right ones towards the end, of course, the more you drink. But, again, it's amazing, that, those slight, that's the word I'm looking for, slight effects on the grape as it grows really changes the wine. I mean, I had a small stint, actually at Hangar One Vodka, and for about 6 months when they first opened after they separated from St. George. And Kaylee Schumacher is the head distiller there, and we actually did something that was pretty interesting that I had never done before, which was a vodka tasting. And she actually chose 8 different vodkas locally distilled in Northern California, and we tasted them all side by side, and they were actually all completely different, which is incredible to me because I always thought vodka, for example, is just something that all tastes the same, and it actually doesn't, depending on what you make it from.
So that's
And so,
a yeah. So that's a pretty good segue that I wish I could take advantage of, but I am too curious about the cost that goes into like getting the sommelier certification and stuff like that, because I do think that's one thing that also kind of makes it a barrier and stuff. But having an idea like doing bottle shares like that seems really smart to me, because you could go and get this huge collection of wine, but then if you're only trying to get like a little taste of it and stuff like that, I mean, I think the bottle share makes a lot more sense. Um, so
absolutely.
so so from there, like you go from tasting all these different things, like really being into wine. You're working as a sommelier at different places. You're working, for some of the Diageo former wineries and stuff like that. Um, at what point did you start to like want to make a move? Was it just to get out of wine into anything, or did you want to get into spirits? And I guess maybe how does that work in with like the Hanger One and then to the Broken Shed?
So I actually took a position as a wine bar manager, actually in Livermore at Concannon Winery. They had a place over there called the Underdog Wine Bar. Um, and this was back, I think it was in like, this is about September time when I accepted the job. And by January, they actually decided to fold the entire wine bar and just make more room for the tasting experience at Concannon. So they actually ended up laying everybody off. Um, and so I was without a job. And I had a wife and a very young child at the time to take care of. So I was looking for whatever that I could um, kind of sink my teeth into, if you will. And so, um, fortunately enough, I saw an ad on, I think it was Force Brands, and I took a job with Hanger One. And I was curious about spirits, but I never really kind of delved into it before. And so I was like, well, I need a job. This is similar to wine tasting because they have a tasting room there and they make, 5 or 6 different flavored vodkas. And so I was like, sure, I can apply the same things that I've learned at a wine tasting to vodka. And so I kind of did so, and I found that they weren't that different. I mean, obviously, the distillation process is a little bit different in the grand scheme of things, but when it comes to talking about texture and flavor profile and things like that, it's all kind of the same common language. And so that's kind of what really piqued my interest. While working there, I was then offered a job as an assistant general manager at a restaurant through somebody that actually came into the tasting room. So I ended up taking that job because it was a little bit more money, and obviously I had a wife and a family and a mortgage. So got back into restaurants, and I took over the entire bar program when I started that job, and really started being able to sit down and taste not only wine, which was kind of my focus, but a ton of different spirits as well. And that's actually kind of where I fell in love with spirits. That's actually when I started kind of doing my first delving into mezcals and bourbon. And so luckily enough, we were a larger account that was able to get a lot of the different little allocated bottles, and my boss let me buy them at cost. So I kind of took it full advantage of that, and kind of went from there. And literally I feel like it's very similar to you, Drew, in a sense that you almost like to literally try anything that you can get your hands on. I'm kind of the same way. If I see something unique or funky, my wife's like, "You don't really need another bottle." I'm like, "Yeah, but I've not tried this one, so yes, I do." It's part of our job. So, um, yeah, I tend to probably spend more than I should on booze, but it is what it is. And so I started kind of using those same things that I had learned at Hanger One, and kind of developing a wine list. And then I found out from my boss that they were actually letting go of the general manager at the restaurant, unfortunately, for some other reasons. So I got promoted to the GM within 6 months, and I was actually the only manager at the restaurant. They decided not to hire anybody else. We were a 30,000 square foot restaurant in Walnut Creek doing $45,000 Friday nights. And I was there 100 hours a week. And I just honestly couldn't keep up. My wife was a single mother. I never saw my family. And so I ended up started kind of thinking, do I want to get back into wine or do I want to continue pursuing this thing with spirits? And spirits kind of won. I ended up finding actually this job on Forest Brands, and I interviewed for it. It took like 4 months for me to finally actually hear something back. I guess I interviewed a ton of different people with this position. And I guess the thing that stood out to the hiring manager was my sommelier background, actually, because he gave me the taste of the vodka without actually ever kind of seeing it or trying it before. I knew nothing about Broken Shed except for what I was able to Google. And I kind of gave him a sommelier's kind of approach to the vodka. And he loved the way that I described it. So they ended up offering me the job a few months later, and now I'm on your side, my man.
Yeah, well, yeah. Welcome to the dark side. That's what it's all about. Um, so when it comes to making that transition, and I think one thing that I'm always curious about is developing that vocabulary and talking about things with like when it comes to picking up different textures or tasting points and stuff like that. Like, what advice do you give people in terms of developing your palate in that way? Like, what are the things that they should be doing?
Oh, I mean, I would say, if you want to continue to develop your palate, one of my favorite ways is when I get anything new, um, I actually like to try it a multitude of ways. I like to try it straight, just neat, if you will. Then I'll dilute it with a little bit of ice. Maybe I will do it over an ice cube without diluting it. And, really just kind of playing with the base spirit or liqueur and just kind of seeing what it is that those different effects have on it, because all of those actually affect the texture. I mean, you can bruise vodka by shaking it too hard. You can bruise gin by shaking it too hard. I think you see it a lot within like the bourbon world, for example. The argument is to drink it neat or over a single big cube or with small cubes. I mean, everybody has their opinion of how they like to do it, but they all affect the base spirit in different ways. And so, when I tasted Broken Shed for the first time, it was actually neat. And it started off, just like any vodka, it does have a little bit of heat. But I think that what happened was it was a brand new bottle, and so it had a lot of that like ethyl still like kind of built up in the neck, and so I had to let it breathe for a little bit. And I would say the same thing with any other spirit too: is let it breathe for a few minutes before you do anything to it. Let some of that ethyl alcohol burn off, and then you can actually kind of see what's behind it. I mean, most people describe vodka as rocket fuel, and it's not all rocket fuel. I mean, it's kind of like with anything else. If you start with really good ingredients, you're going to get a really good product. Not to name other brands out there that are bad brands, but if you start with some of the best water in the world, and I mean that's what mostly of what vodka is made from, you're going to get an incredible product. And so, when tasting, I would say just almost treat it like a sommelier would. You can even do. They actually have this guide to tasting with when you're a sommelier, and it's like it's an acronym. I hate to use the acronym, but what it is it's basically you first look at it, see if it's clear, and there's actually a whole chart of from like perfectly clear all the way to ruby, which is like the darkest when you're talking wine. But you would first assess it with your eyes, then you would assess it with your nose, because you actually do most of the tasting through your nose, um, and then it's married with the upper part of your palate, and then you taste. You taste, let it sit in your palate. You coat your tongue with it. You can even suck air over the top. I mean, I don't necessarily recommend it for spirits, but I mean, you can use a lot of the same implements when you're talking spirits, and then let it set in your palate, and then swallow it, and then do that process again, and you'll actually notice that you're almost treating your mouth as like an aerator and like priming it, and you'll probably notice something completely different the next time. I mean, you at that mezcal event that we did back, I think it was like November. it was very, I was doing something very similar with the clon taste that we were trying, and able to try to taste the differentiations between them. And it was amazing. That's kind of what sold me on the product. And, I tend to try to do the same thing with anything that I taste. And I keep a journal. I actually have probably 4 or 5 of them that I've written through now. They're just, lined small notebook papers, but I've written notes on almost every tasting that I've ever done. I even take it when I go wine tasting and things like that. I do it when I buy new spirits. I've got one for spirits, I've got one for liqueurs, and a couple for wine. And it's really kind of fun to take notes on these things and try them, then maybe let the bottle set for a little bit and go back and visit it and see if your notes are the same. And so that's something that I do as well.
So I know you don't like using it, but what is the acronym, just so we can have it for our notes at home?
Okay, give me 1 second because I don't use it, but give me a second and I'll get you the name of it. Hold on. It is. This is embarrassing. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. You'll just get, blown up in the YouTube comments. Be like, this guy doesn't know anything. Oh, I will ask you this. How often are you referencing those notes again? I mean, outside of just like retasting the stuff, because that's where, I know I have like notebooks and stuff, but I rarely look at them again, and I know I need to be better about that stuff.
Oh, I would say I probably look at them every few months. I try to. It is, I mean, it really just depends. Like I said, I have one for spirits, one for liqueurs, one for wine. Um, it really just kind of depends on what I'm doing. I typically like to try uh, a multitude of things over again. And I mean, I have a core van at home, which helps with at least the wine side of it. I can core van something, take notes on it, let it set for 6 weeks or a year, and then go back and revisit it again. And it 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 helps. I mean, like I said, I look at it probably um, let's say a couple times a month. Um, but yeah. All right, where is that freaking? You know what? I'll go grab my book in a second. I have my W set and my book, and I'll send you the link for it. I
Yeah,
can't.
we can
My
look at it later. It's okay. It's all right.
sorry, man.
Okay. No, you're good. That's you thought we were only going to talk vodka today, and I'm throwing curveballs at you.
Yeah, you
But
are.
like
And I've been up.
the reason I like to do that is just because it's like we have so many unique experiences in this industry, and and I'd love to hear like people's stories and the way that they develop their palate, because I think more often the case is like people get really nervous about sharing what they're tasting, because there's like perceived experts and there's like what you're supposed to say, what you're
Sure.
not supposed to say. And I just, I remember being at a point, during my spirits career where I would taste something, but I'd be too nervous to say what I was tasting. And then somebody
Totally.
else would say it, and then I'd feel like a jackass. I was like, damn it, I was thinking that, and I wish I would have said that. So when I hear people's stories about like, hey, this is what I did, this is my process, like my hope is that people will take that information and like learn things from you and kind of be like, okay, well, Jay did this, this, and this. And now I'm gonna start taking more notes. And I know like, Catherine's definitely one of them who's on the call right now. Like she takes, crazy amounts of notes. And so I just think it's, I think it's good to tell those stories and to like to see like the industry experts being like, yeah, I'm doing the same thing as them, and helping develop
Totally.
your palate stuff. So but we'll
I
now let's talk about vodka, because I know that's kind of what we're here for. But do you
I
have a
will
thought?
I will say one thing on all that. And what I would say is that when it comes to developing your palate, I learned actually at a very I would say younger age when it comes to tasting anything. Don't listen to the experts. And this is one of the reasons that they're great. Their opinions, just like everybody else has an opinion about their favorite sports team, their favorite player. I mean, everybody has an opinion on something. my favorite thing about the spirits industry is that no matter what you like to drink, there's literally something out there for everybody, regardless of budget. And if you taste a wine and you taste elderflower and roses, but I'm getting cherry cola and Dr. Pepper, everybody's palate's different. You, it there is no wrong answer. I mean, there's guidelines, sure, but it's just kind of like the quarantine guidelines.
Yeah.
You do what you want to. You do what you want with them.
Dude, no kidding, bro. Like, and and I do think it's it's something that's like extremely personal as well, right? So, if you're mentioning Dr. Pepper, like that could be like a very pleasant thing for you. For somebody else, I don't know who's having bad experiences with Dr. Pepper, but you never know.
Sure.
It's just it might be something that turns people off, and that's where like I know I find myself like when I'm doing tastings and stuff like that I feel like I give descriptors without being actually too detailed. So I'm actually like, I'll say things like, it's a really, it has like a really sharp up front, and then there's a long finish, and there's a lot of complexity like throughout the middle, and it's like it sounds like I'm saying a whole lot, and I am describing things, but I'm not being too committal to like one type of taste, and
Sure.
because again, you don't want to make people feel like dumb or sound ridiculous at
No,
the same time. So it's like that really weird balance that you have to do.
absolutely. I mean, you have to kind of. I think you also have to play to your audience a little bit too when it comes to any type of tasting. I mean, when I was pouring wine at um, wineries, I mean, there were some groups that came in that were bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, and they did not care what the wine tasted like as long as they were getting drunk. And I mean, you could tell them that, oh, it's smooth and tastes like cherry cola, and they'll be like, oh my god, this does taste like cherry cola. And then you get the guys that come in who are serious about wine, and they want to know exactly where it was grown, how it was made, when it was picked. Like, you just, one of the things that I notice is in this industry is you just kind of have to play up to your audience a bit and figure out what, by listening to them and asking them questions, you can gauge about the level of information that they want to know. And you always, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it too after tastings and things. You get pulled aside by people who were a little too nervous to kind of say something, and kind of they want to delve deeper into it and find more about it. But in that crowd setting, whereas you and I are a bit more comfortable, people tend to get a little bit more nervous, and they don't want to sound silly or dumb. So they'll come and be like,
Right.
hey, Drew, what was that again? Where did that come
Right.
from?
Right.
And so, but I would say when it comes to tasting anything, though, it's your own palate. You taste what you like, you drink what you like, and there's no wrong answer. I mean, again, 100-point wines are just somebody who makes a lot of money by giving their opinion about wine. I
I
mean,
think, yeah, I think that's some really good like insight, and especially for whether you're a bartender, brand ambassador, or just like if you're at home and you're hanging out with the family and stuff, like you are kind of gauging like somebody's interest level, and it's smart to be aware of that, and to be like, okay, how much into the weeds that do I need to get? Do I need to talk about fermentation time, or do I need to just kind of be like, yes, it's good, and just leave it at that, don't get too crazy with it.
yeah. I mean,
So
to be perfectly honest, my
go
wife,
ahead.
perfectly honest, hates going wine tasting with me because I want to go down that rabbit hole, and she just wants to know if it's good or not. So
Yeah.
I can hardly drag her wine tasting with me. So I usually have to go with another buddy or a group of people that actually are interested in it, because my wife could care less. As long as she likes the taste of it, she's fine with it.
Yeah, that's something that we've made the adjustment in our household as well, where I'll actually like I'll now like, because I do a lot of the driving too, so it's like I skip a ton of tastings that we go to. One, because of the driving, obviously, but then two, uh, she doesn't want to hear my notes on everything, so she just is like,
Yeah.
no, just let me taste, and then you just shut up, and you don't have to give your notes on every single thing. But
Sure.
but I do think it's really interesting to kind of see you make that jump from wine, which has all these complexities to it and stuff like that, and then and I know you've come to change your mindset, and this is kind of part of what you do now with Broken Shed, but it's like vodka definitely has that reputation for being a neutral spirit, like kind of like
Sure.
the goal is to not have taste and things like that, and it seems like there's always like these new kind of crazy things coming out with vodka and stuff like that, whether it's flavors or sources or whatever like that. But you guys are doing something that's pretty cool in terms of like what that source material is. So can now, we're 30 minutes into this stuff.
It's all good.
Can you talk about what Broken Shed is using as its base?
Yeah, so we're actually based out of New Zealand, and we use a combination of sheep and cow's milk whey uh, as our base distillate for the vodka. So that makes it kind of unique. There's actually only, that I know of right now, three in the world. And as people start to care more about the environment and sustainability, I think we're going to start seeing actually an influx of whey-based spirits, because it's actually one of the biggest wasted byproducts in both the United States, Europe, and Australia and New Zealand, because those are the largest, obviously, dairy producing areas. And just for like an example, to make a single pound of cheese, you're actually left with about 9 pounds of whey. And there's not a whole lot that you can do with it. So um, what they do is they separate the cheese curd. Obviously, the curd goes into making yogurt or milk or cheese, of course, and then the whey is left behind. And what's interesting about whey is even more that it's a byproduct of dairy is that when it comes to, like, say, cow's milk, for example, you have two types of protein in. You have whey protein and you have casein. Casein makes up about 80% of it, and that's actually what they're looking for. That's referred to as sweet whey, which is a little bit higher in sugar and much easier to work with, while the other form of whey would be acid whey, um, and or whey protein. And that's actually, there's not a whole lot that you can do with it. As kind of I said earlier, it's either used in industrial applications for like pig feed or animal food. You'll find it as like a byproduct in like cat food, dog food, things like that, to kind of boost the protein content. You'll see it used in, obviously, whey protein for people who really like to work out and want to get large at the gym. Or other than that, it kind of just gets thrown away. I mean, actually, one of the largest problems in large dairy producing areas is actually what to do with the whey. A lot of the times they don't dispose of it properly, and it ends up going down like the gutter and ends up in the water sources in those areas. And that can actually be an environmental problem for them as well. Because if you get enough of the acid within the water source, it can actually stymie the life within it. And actually, how our vodka started was through an environmental disaster. Our two founders were on a fishing trip in New Zealand, and they had to leave where they were fishing due to a toxic algae bloom that was happening where they were fishing. And so they later found out it was caused to a whey because of a few dairies that were upstream from where they were. They'd released a large dump earlier in the week, and it caused an algae bloom, which happens when you get an influx of nitrates and protein in the water, along with perfect weather, and it can actually come to toxic levels. So that's kind of the beginning of their story. But again, it's environmentally kind of, there's not a whole lot you can do with it. So they've kind of started to figure out, okay, well, we can buy something that is already made for really cheap because they're throwing it away. And they found actually a special yeast that was inoculated in Ireland that can survive the remaining acidity to eat the remaining like 0.5% sugar content, to ferment it, to turn it into their base distillate for the vodka. As I said, there's only two others that I know of in the world currently. One of them is from the United Kingdom, and the other one is actually from Tasmania, which
Interesting.
is kind of, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and I think when we initially talked about this, like, like not only were your founders, kind of like in this toxic, dump of a situation, but like it was almost like a really bad situation had they stayed there longer, right? I mean, that's how bad these toxic levels can get, is that their life and their health was actually at risk.
Yeah, actually, yeah. It causes, again, for the water that they're standing in, it will start killing the fish. Actually, a kind of a funny story here in the Bay Area. We get probably 6 to 8 algae blooms a year that travel up through the delta. I mean, they never actually reach like toxic levels, but during that time of the year, um, I live about a mile from the delta. You can actually see the layer of algae on the water, and so it makes it difficult for like boats and people to travel through. But these toxic levels, like I said, they basically suffocate all the oxygen out of the area that they are in, because the algae is expanding rapidly and kind of absorbing all of it. And so that's actually what makes it dangerous for humans, because it's almost like, carbon monoxide, where you can suffocate without really knowing it. It's
Hmm.
kind of the same thing. It will basically, asphyxiate you before you realize it if you stay within these areas, um, because they are absorbing oxygen so quickly. That's kind of the main danger. It's not like necessarily poisonous to stand in the water. It's not going to um, kill you if you drink it, but it will remove the oxygen from the area that you're in, actually. And in doing so through evaporation, I mean, you can get a little bit of toxic rain occasionally through it, but for the most part, like I said, it's mostly through asphyxiation. It's very, because they release carbon monoxide, actually, um, through their process of expanding quickly, and so not only are you losing oxygen, but then breathing in carbon monoxide, and it's not a good situation to be in. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
that's a crazy thing to think about. And I'm in when these guys take a look at this issue, and you know was it like right off the bat like, oh, let's see if we can ferment it, or were there other solutions that they tried to find before they got to the fermenting? Because it doesn't, I mean, to me that seems like a long, or would be a long process to not only think like, okay, let's try to ferment something that has very very little sugar in it, and then on top of that now we have to find this random yeast strain that's found in Ireland. It's nowhere near New Zealand, so it's like, you're, I mean, I don't know what that the yeast network is, but I can't imagine, that it's like, hey guys, try this one next. I'm curious, like what is that process? How do they get to that point where they're like, well, clearly the thing to do here is to
So
make vodka.
so what they were actually, the two gentlemen who founded the company actually left the area where they were fishing, and they escaped to their cabin, which was on Lake Wanaka, which is in the southern hemisphere of New Zealand. And uh, what was there is what we would call a cabin, or what they call a shed, and it was kind of like a broken down fishing shed. And they started drinking a competitor's brand, if you will. I don't I don't have 100% confirmation of which brand it was, but I believe I was told it was Grey Goose. And they kind of got drunk that evening, and they started thinking about, what they could do. They'd always talked about kind of getting into spirits, and so they decided to set out and try to make vodka. And so they kind of started doing some research, and they found the one company in the UK who was doing it, that has been around for a while, and they decided that they would reach out, because New Zealand's largest export is actually dairy and cheese, next to sheep's wool. And so they decided to reach out and kind of to a bunch of different dairies and see what it is that they could do with it. And so in 2007, they bought their first batch of whey, and they started trying different yeasts. And from what I understand, I don't have the exact strain or where they got it from in Ireland, but they tested close to 100 different yeasts before they finally found one that would actually survive. And then they started playing around with the different sources of whey within New Zealand. They were basically giving it away for free to their friends and family and They were giving comment cards so that everybody would take notes, and they made probably, I want to say, I was told they made about 15 to 20 different batches of the vodka before they finally settled on what it currently is today. And they played around with how many different times you distill it, how many times you filter it, if you filter it. Actually, kind of a funny story, our master distiller actually was a water blender for a juice company before he became our distiller. And so as they were going through this process, they met him, and he had these two kind of fantastic water sources and wanted to kind of share them. I mean, obviously, vodka is 60% water, so it matters the water content that you put in it, where it comes from. And so they took this whey distillate. They used these two different water sources, and he actually blended the water a bunch of different times too to get the right consistency in the water of what he was looking for. And that was really important to Mark, who was our distiller. Even more than the whey was the water, because New Zealand is one of the last kind of pure, if you will, spots on Earth as far as their water sources are concerned. And so they had this great whey distillate, but the water, like I said, I think is even a little bit more important because it really does kind of taste like where it's from.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's a big reason why Japanese whiskey has a flavor profile that it does, is because the water,
Absolutely.
is totally different. So, fast forwarding, from the start of the company now, like, so now you're working as the NorCal, brand ambassador. What does that look like for you? Like, what's a typical day to day in the life of a Broken Shed Vodka brand ambassador?
Well, vodka's a little interesting. I mean, it's the largest category in the United States. Last year, they sold, I think it was 79.5 million 9-liter cases,
Jesus.
which if you think about it, with the trending of whiskey and everything else, vodka is still the backbone of the liquor industry. And so what my day to day looks like, it's not super exciting. Like you, I spend a lot of time in my car. Usually I have a few weeks out planned of which area I'm going to be in. I mean, I cover from Bakersfield to the Oregon border. So I do drive quite a bit. Um, my focus, however, is the East Bay and Sacramento, as well as like Fresno and Bakersfield is kind of where I spend most of my time. And usually what I'll do is, like I said, I'll kind of pre-plan a few weeks out. I usually try to be in one region for a couple of days. So, I'll wake up, I'll drive. I only live an hour and like 15 minutes from Sac, so I'll spend a few days in Sac. And usually I'll do one day going through like the retail side of it and trying to introduce people to the brand. I mean, we've only been around in California for actually right around a year, so we're fairly new to this market. Um, and so part of my job is really just try to raise awareness. Whether people are buy it or not is not necessarily the important part. It's more about getting people to let me tell the story. Let me tell them how Broken Shed is a little bit different and get it in their glass so that they can see it's different. Um, Most people, when I pour it for them, will say that it's probably the smoothest vodka that they've ever had. And that's because of the whey distillate that goes into it. Whereas, something made with corn might be a little bit harsher, or something with like, say, a grain base has a little bit more, maybe like a sharper edge, I would say, like the best way I would describe it. Um, and this tends to be very round. It doesn't because of the whey and the lactose base, it actually doesn't have a ton of that like ethyl alcohol burn to it. And so that's kind of what drew me to it is it has texture. It has almost like a viscosity to it. It has um, most people, when I pour it, I like to pour it to them straight without actually adding anything to it, because it is, like I said, incredibly smooth. And I know smooth is not a flavor profile. We've joked about this on Facebook, but it is texturally, because a lot of people think alcohol literally tastes like rocket fuel, and so it literally burns the entire way down. And this, for the most part, it doesn't. I mean, it still has that like ethyl burn, but it's very mild compared to, say, other brands. And So again, most of my challenge is really trying to kind of introduce it to people um, through various channels. I mean, whether it be through doing like tasting events that I'll do a couple a week, or uh, if a bar or restaurant was to bring it in when things are operating normally, I go back in and we do like these promo nights. And so, like you, Drew, I think we both kind of work unusual hours. There's some days where we'll start work at 8 in the morning and be done by 2 in the afternoon. And there's other days that we start at 11 or 12 and don't get done until 8 or 9 at night, just really depending on kind of what's going on. And so, but most of my time really is just about is introducing the brand, reaching out to the different distributor reps to kind of make sure that they're aware about the programming that we have, and just kind of try to follow up with accounts that carry it to support them in ways. Um, whatever. One of the nice things I will say about being with just this brand and having this brand to focus on is that they have a lot of support behind it. They really give us all the tools that we need to make sure that people are aware of it, which is super helpful when it comes to vodka because it is very competitive. I mean, just in our category alone, I mean, most people are like, well, why do I need another vodka? That's probably the biggest challenge or question that I ask every day, or I answer every day is why do they need Broken Shed? And so, you know, usually I come back at them with, well, it's different than anything that you carry. It's sustainable. It, for specifically like cocktails and restaurants, it takes on infusions really well due to the viscosity, even more so than some of the other brands that I've played with. Um, it's not kind of the market we're going after is that like Grey Goose Belvedere, but it's not that price point. We're looking at retail about $24.99 as opposed to like 28 or 29.99 with like those guys. So a couple bucks more than like say Tito's, for example, but not as expensive as like the Belvedere and Grey Gooses of the world. I would say we're probably priced closer to like Kettle in a sense, and so that's kind of um, where we're aiming. But we're standing out to be different because all of those guys have been around for a really long time, and so we're trying to be the new kid on the block, if you will.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because you answered like four of the questions that I had lined up for you right there, just in terms of like challenges and stuff that you face and everything like that. And I appreciate you just kind of covering all the bases. 'Cause I know, yeah, you do it every single day, but I think one of my favorite stories when it comes to you, and like and obviously throughout this conversation you've proven time and time again that you have this curiosity when it comes to spirits, and it's just like that curiosity brought you to this brand, but then you're still engaging with other brands and going to different tastings and stuff like that. So could you tell the story of going to a farm near you and convincing the
Sure.
farmer that you were, I don't want to give away the whole thing, but
Oh, it's fine.
yeah, go
So
for it.
I was still working at the restaurant at the time. I had put in my 2 weeks, and I had found out that I gotten the job with Broken Shed, and so mm, I knew nothing about cheese. I knew nothing about the dairy process, and so I reached out to. Uh, I kind of went on Google. I did a Google search and reached out to a few different dairies within Napa and Sonoma County, and basically through a series of phone calls and begging, I finally found one that would allow me to spend a day or two with them, kind of learning the process, and it was pretty interesting. Got to milk my first cow, which was cool, and then got to kind of watch the process of how they take that raw milk and take that and turn it into curd, and where that curd goes. I mean, that curd it's not a hard process. You basically bring it all to a boil, you simmer, you keep skimming the curds off the top as they float because it's the milk solid that gets then compacted into like cheesecloth and then set aside. And what you're left with is kind of like this white, grayish milky liquid, and that is whey. I mean, if you ever opened up a yogurt container and look into it, and you like see that like film of kind of gray goop on top, that's actually whey.
Hmm.
Um, that's actually separated from the remaining milk, fat, and curd within your yogurt. That's actually whey that floats to the top. And so uh, I worked with him. He taught me how to make cheese, and I've actually made cheese from home a couple of times since then, by buying raw milk. It's actually not that hard to find. Most people will let you buy it for relatively inexpensive. There's actually a couple of good farms up near you, Drew, to go get some raw milk in
I'll,
case you're ever
I'll
interested in making some cheese.
it's been my life goal is to do that. So I'll have
We'll make
to,
we'll make some
I'll,
cheese.
yeah, I'll have to make some cheese. No, I just think
But
that's so. I think it's just so funny that you did that. And that you know, I mean, and putting yourself out there to try to learn like a different part of the business that is obviously a huge part of what you guys do. But I mean, I don't. Did any of the other Broken Shed ambassadors go to Way Farms or Milk
I
Farms?
doubt it. I doubt it. I told that story in our team meeting. Sometime early last year, and everybody's like, "You went to a dairy?" I was like, "We just Googled how to make whey, like how whey is made." I'm like, "Why not?" I mean, luckily, there's a couple other of us here in California, and there's so many farms here, so it makes that kind of stuff easy. I mean, I live in Brentwood, in the East Bay, and literally just down the street from my house, I've got uh, probably 15 different farms. So I can go get eggs, honey, fruit. I mean, I can even get actually wine from one of the farms. They make their own wine. Like, I mean, that life has kind of always fascinated me as growing up in that, in kind of where I was from in North Carolina, where I was born. My parents either hunted or grew everything that we ate. So that kind of has carried over a little bit too. So I figured out, if I'm going to learn about milk, and I mean, everybody's going to ask me, well, what is whey? I mean, that's probably one of the biggest questions that I answer on a day-to-day basis. Is most people, I say, oh, it's made from whey, they're like, whey protein? And I'm like, no, 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 like whey, like Little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet eating her curds and whey. I mean, that's a very English like breakfast, because we don't eat that here. Actually, in England, I don't know if you've ever been, Drew, but you will get the curds to spread on toast.
I have not
So,
been. I have not.
but
Add that to the to-do list.
but yeah, I mean, you can actually get curds on toast, and you know, most people, like I said, think whey protein, and so I kind of have to explain to them, no, it's whey before whey protein is made. Whey protein's made from whey by what they actually do is they take the remaining liquid, they put it through a centrifuge, and they separate the remaining uh, curd solids that do still kind of linger in there. They dry it in a large kiln, and then they pulverize it into a powder, and that's actually how whey protein is made. I did not go to a whey protein factory to learn that. I watched it. I watched a video, but people always. I mean, one of the biggest questions, like I said, people ask is what is whey, and so before I even get into the New Zealand water and all that stuff, I actually have to explain to them what whey is, and so kind of going with we're going to go with the honor of the day, since it's May the 4th. This is the way. It's the way to make whey, baby. So I just, again, it's kind of the same thing that kind of led me into Napa to learn more about wine. Is I enjoyed wine, but I wanted to learn more about it, so I figured the best way to do it is to get a job at a winery. I mean, and one of the reasons that I got into sales is I actually did have a short stint at Young's Market Company, and I wanted to learn how to sell, and so I figured the best way to learn how to sell wine and spirits was to get a job at a distributor. So there you go. I did it for 2 years. It wasn't my favorite, but I learned how to talk to people about sales, and uh, it helps. It helps in restaurant settings. It helps in this job today. It's a skill that I learned that I'll have for the rest of my career. So I can't complain about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and Catherine actually mentions that she loves the immersion that you take in, and I know I can certainly appreciate that. I mean, I love going to different distilleries and seeing, how the cheese is made, if you will. And I think it's a cool aspect of it. And one final question or thing I wanted you to talk about, because I do think it's really awesome, is we're obviously in unprecedented times right now, and we're just trying to find ways to help this industry. And I think it's one of the things, and that obviously you don't hear this, but like when people talk about you, it's like, oh, that's the Broken Shed Vodka guy, right? It's like yeah. It's like, oh, he's a really good guy. It's like, yeah, he is a good guy. That's a good quality to have as a rep, and as a brand ambassador. But you've kind of really taken that to the next level recently. And can you talk about some of the meal programs that you've been doing through COVID and stuff like that?
Sure. Not we don't do it to brag or anything like that, but one of my focuses is during this time is I really wanted to reach out to um, restaurants that whether they carried Broken Shed or not. I mean, most of them haven't or don't currently, but it's tough for those guys to survive. I mean, having been in the industry, I know what our margins or their margins roughly look like, and it's very thin. And so something that I've been trying to do um, is to sponsor industry meals through Broken Shed. So I've done a few of them with like the Golden Bear up in Sac, the Empress Tavern, and a couple here in the East Bay, where it's like, hey, Broken Shed will sponsor say 15 meals in one night, and at no cost to the industry worker, they can go and pick up a meal on Broken Shed Vodka through that account until they're gone. We've done it a few different times up in Sac and in the East Bay. And I think the one that I'm probably the most proud of is, I'm sure, Drew, you're familiar with Chris Tucker over at Hook and Ladder.
Yep.
I reached out to him actually through Instagram. I had an idea about trying to do what I could to feed hospital workers in the Sacramento area. So over the last couple of weeks, Chris and I have partnered through Hook and Ladder, and we've fed about 120 hospital workers and COVID testers in the Sac area. And I think we're going to do another drop, hopefully next week, for another maybe 30 or 40. But Broken Shed's not a huge company, but luckily I am fortunate enough that I do have a small budget that I can play around with. And so instead of using that for frivolous things, we're trying to do our part to it's kind of a twofold. We're trying to raise awareness for our brand, but we're also trying to sponsor meals and get people what they need in these times. And so, hospital workers, both my neighbors are hospital workers, and I know that they're on their feet 12 to 14 hours a day, and probably even longer now during this time. And so something that we could do as a brand is to have a nutritious meal that's waiting for them when they do have an opportunity to sit down for their lunch or to take home after their shift. That's something that we've been able to do. And, it was really exciting for me just to go and drop that off. Seeing the nurses and kind of the COVID stations set up around the front of the emergency rooms and things like that. It's kind of surreal. It's almost like almost felt like I was kind of going into a war zone in a sense, because there's all these signs that do not go anywhere. You can't pass this if you don't have a mask or badge, and it's intense. And I couldn't imagine. I mean, luckily for you and I, we chose a job that, while we have goals and numbers that we have to make, it's not too serious. I mean, we're selling a good time to people, and so for us, being able to offer at least a little bit of a reprieve for those people who are out there busting their butts trying to make sure that this can go away as quickly as possible, is more than rewarding for me. And it's something that I hope that we're able to continue to do so even after all of COVID. I know that some of these larger companies have been writing checks and things like that, and who knows where those are going to end up. But at the more local level, just trying to do what we can. So if anybody on the chat tonight, Drew, yourself, Mark, Catherine, if you guys have anybody who is in need of just some groceries or something like that, please, I'll be more than happy to give you guys my phone number. Let me know. I'd be more than happy to try to go and spend a little bit of my budget to get a bag of groceries and drop them off at somebody's house, or through DoorDash, send them some dinner or something like that. Whatever we can do to help, including yourselves. If you guys are out of work or whatnot, we'd be more than happy to help kind of come alongside with you and kind of take care of that. So, I think one of the biggest ways to get people to kind of notice you is just the small actions. We don't expect a ton from it, but it's not even more about sales or anything like that. We're not trying to sell a ton of vodka from this. It's more about really just trying to hopefully integrate Broken Shed within the community as a partner who wants to be there, wants to support those areas, and help take care of those people who have a need.
Totally, man. And I mean, and that's what I wouldn't have given you this platform if I didn't think you guys were genuine or anything like that. But we do want to hopefully send some business your way. So if someone's interested in getting some Broken Shed vodka or anything like that, how do they get a hold of you? Like, what's the social media handles and stuff like that?
Sure. You guys can take my personal cell. It's on my business card, but you can just shoot me a quick text. It's here. I'll put it in the chat. Actually, it's just probably be easier for me to type my handles and everything there too. So that's my cell. My Instagram is at BrokenShed_J. Those are probably the two best ways. You can either DM me or shoot me a phone call or a text message. And also on brokenshed.com, actually, we have a locator. So if it's something that you want to try, you can actually go onto brokenshed.com, there's a place that says find it. You can enter your zip code. And hopefully I've done my job well enough that there's some within like a 25-mile radius for me to get some. If not, let me know. You can let me know what liquor store you frequent, and I can go try to work with them to get them to carry the brand. If not, if that all fails, I will give you a bottle from my personal stash because I have more than enough at home.
Oh, well, that's good, man. I'm hopefully, I'm starting to see it at more and more places. So I'm pretty sure someone's going to be able to find it within 25 miles for sure. Well, dude, thank you so much for being a guest tonight. And, we're going to upload this on YouTube as well. So make sure you share it. Because remember, we're trying to grow the Jay Vanni brand right now as well. I think everybody here tonight and everybody who eventually watches this on YouTube is definitely going to take a bigger interest in you and then also Broken Shed Vodka. So may the 4th be with you. And
may the 4th be with you.
And
we didn't get to talk about Legos though, man.
It's okay. We can. This is. I don't know if this thing's going to wait anytime soon, so we'll do that.
I'm about this close to finishing the Batmobile.
Well, I look forward to the pictures,
take a picture
man.
of it when it's done.
Please do. But have a good night, brother. Have a good night, everybody else, and hopefully we see you guys in the rest of the month at different things. And stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good night.
I'll see you tomorrow, Drew. Bye.